Our mission, and we choose to accept it, is zero injuries and zero environmental impact. A healthy workforce and environment is key to our nation's continued success. The Mission Zero podcast is a deep dive with the industry's top experts into the health, safety, and environmental aspects of today's workplace. Our mission is to be a platform for new ideas and strategies that, when implemented, will improve our safety, our environment, and how we govern out business. We are making the world safer, and we're going to have fun doing it.
Welcome back to the Mission Zero podcast. I'm Justin Overstreet. I'm here on remote assignment. Jeff Peoples is back in the Houston area, but I came up to Fort Worth today to talk to one of my favorite people in the world. He's one of my best friends, and he just so happens to have a really a unique profession and a unique background. So, Jonathan Jacobs, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. And I've watched all your other podcasts, and you say that it's your favorite person every time, so
well,
I don't feel that great.
But
still glad to be here.
We just met a minute ago, but still, I appreciate you doing that, and I'll edit that out. But, Jonathan, you and I have known each other for, over a decade now. We've worked together. We've been friends, and, families of our friends. Our kids have grown up together the same age, those types of things. And you've always had a really, unique background. But and I know that, obviously, but our listeners don't necessarily. So give us a rundown of kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. So, obviously today I'm the head of services and support for Shield AI, formerly Martin UAV. We're a drone provider and producer, predominantly in the defense sector, out of here out of North Texas and California and a few other places. But, from this, I've been in the unmanned industry for probably the last decade or so, and then in aviation since longer than I'd like to admit. Joined the Marines just after 9/11 and ended up unwittingly actually getting into aviation. I signed up for what was a radio operator job, thinking that I was going to be airdropped into wherever and operating radios, and it turned out that I was just going to be working on C-130s and operating radios in airplanes, which turned out to be the best thing that could have ever happened to me.
Did you not realize airplanes had radios?
Well, I did, but so I actually wanted to be a Ranger like my brother, and so
you joined the Marines?
Well, I tried to join the Army first,
okay.
And I said I want to be a Ranger, and they said, well, we can't guarantee you that, but if you go infantry, you might be able to option for Ranger school later. And I asked my brother about that, and he said, well, I went in '88, and there's guys that I know that are still waiting for Ranger school, so maybe don't. And so I walked next door to the Marine Corps recruiting office and said, I want to be the closest thing to a Ranger that you have. And they said, well, you could do, at the time they had Force Recon, and they're like, but you got to go infantry first and then option for Force Recon. And I said, yeah, they tried this. This next door. Yeah, and I said, well, what else do you have? And so they said, well, we have this. They had and the airborne radio operator. And I thought, that's it. I'm going to do that. Was not what I thought it was, but it turned out to be amazing. It got me into aviation, which was not ever something that I thought I would do. But through years in the Marine Corps and aviation, I actually ended up, after I got out of the Marine Corps, got off active duty, I got a call from a friend of mine that was a navigator in C-130s that I'd flown with for years, and he said, hey, what do you know about drones? And I said, nothing. And he said, well, what do you know about Afghanistan? And I said, well, a lot.
I know some things, yeah.
I know some things. And he's like, cool. Hey, well, I'm just got on with this company, and we're out of Washington, and we're, basically you just come on and go over and fly drones over in Iraq and Afghanistan and wherever else. And I said, that sounds like fun. And he said, yeah, they pay really well. I said, okay, cool. So I left the job that I was at, and I started flying drones, and that was in 2008. And since then, I've been in UAS, counter UAS, both in the defense and civilian side, like I said, probably for the last decade or so.
Yeah, and then I pulled you into the oil and gas industry for a brief period because I was like,
yeah,
everyone should experience that horror, every once in a while.
Yeah, no, and it was the perfect timing as well. I got to experience the brief high, and then the precipitous dropout that I think everybody rolls through at some point.
If you say that long enough, for sure. But even in the oil and gas industry, we still utilized UAV technology successfully, and we did so when there was a biblical flood
Mm-hmm.
down in the Madisonville area in Texas between Fort Worth and Houston, and we used it quite effectively.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I mean, I know you and I had talked about the idea of drones in the oil field for a bit prior to that happening, and that was a really good event to kind of drive us into it. But I would say that experience was, for me, the moment where I recognized really the utility that drones could have in that space. I mean, you obviously remember you were there. They probably weren't, but we were able to save hundreds of thousands of dollars in remediation costs and fines and other things by being able to utilize that drone to check on these wells and to understand water flows and stuff like that. And so that for me was the moment that I realized that this investment of $1,000 or $1,500, whatever it cost at the time, yielded immediate and extreme results in savings. Right. And not only personnel and financial costs of having to send people out there. So
yeah, and it was a really tricky area because it butted right up against the Trinity River.
Yep.
And so any hydrocarbon loss could potentially flow into there. And like you said, we were able to use the drone to see the actual flow of the water, and then deploy booms and things like that and we got how much oil ended up in the Trinity? Zero.
Yeah. And that was that was the after working with the Railroad Commission and working with the remediation teams, they said, we've done hundreds of these, and you should have never been able to contain it the way you did.
Right.
And it was literally just being able to get that perspective, because looking from the ground you see a sheen and it's really hard to tell, but when you get above it, you can see easily. And alternatively, you would have had to have rented an airplane and gotten a pilot and coordinated all that to get down to that airspace, and then you're somewhat limited. But here, we were able to deploy a UAS within a handful of minutes, and
with an airplane, even you've got to wait for that information to come back from the airplane.
Exactly.
So even with a UAV, we were able to in real time have someone out on a fan boat with boom and direct them, hey, go here, because you can see it's first person perspective.
Correct.
You can see where it's going. So you're right. The utility of the UAV, I was always looking for an excuse to get one professionally anyway, because they're cool. And it just was the right opportunity, and it yielded immediate dividends. It was huge.
Yep.
And we also got to do some integrity testing. You did, specifically landing it in the water, and that was fantastic.
Yeah, it was not sometimes you got to do it was early days for the technology, and batteries weren't what they are today.
Sure.
And obviously operating in a maritime environment has unique considerations.
And by maritime, you mean from a fan boat. And yelling, hurry up, it's falling out of the sky.
Yeah. I will say it's a credit to DJI's product quality even back then that we were able to pull it out and dry it, and it flew again.
Yeah, I think mainly because it lost all power before it hit the water, so there was no electricity going through it to fry anything.
Yeah, it could have been. So, but again, that was what, 20?
That would have been like 2014.
2014, yeah. Which was, very early. It was prior to a lot of the regulations that we have now in Part 107 that actually, was codified around that. Back then it was called the Section 333 exemption that you had to have. And even back then, I think I started recognizing in industry, this is not just a defense tool. This is a tool that's going to have real impact on a lot of different industries, not only from just efficiencies that you gain, but also obviously the safety of being able to check things remotely. I mean, ultimately that's the end game for any unmanned system, is to be able to provide data and intelligence about an area or a situation without having to risk putting a human being into that scenario.
Right. And with the, accessibility of infrared cameras and those types of things, FLIR cameras, all those things are much more accessible now. And you can outfit, just regular quadcopter drones with those. There's no reason to put a human at risk going into a tank battery or whatever to check for fugitive emissions or any type of thing you can think of. And I remember when we were flying it first of all, shout out to Ron Myrick with the Railroad Commission. I remember Ron, he gave me a Texas flag patch I still have, and just a great guy. But I remember we were flying that drone, and he was just amazed by it. And he just thought, man, I don't know why more people aren't doing this. And I think it's
And they are
probably
now.
becoming more prevalent. Yeah.
Yeah, they are. Obviously, we're still waiting. I think the technology has outpaced the regulation, as is typically the case.
Sure.
The government moves slow, and the FAA moves probably even slower in many cases. But what we are seeing now is, as the regulations have loosened and the safety case for drones has been made, as that these can operate in the national airspace with general aviation and manned aircraft in many cases, safely without incident. That's opening it up, and certainly they're being used in countless industries, everything from oil and gas, obviously, like we talked about, transmission line inspection, power line inspection, infrastructure inspections. Again, any time that you need to see or experience or capture some sort of thing, there's an opportunity for an unmanned system to be used.
Absolutely. So, and so that was really my first kind of, professional use of a drone. Again, I've always been drawn to that kind of thing as probably the most passive hobbyist that, I have one. I've had two now. And it's like, I'm going to get this one that's smaller because I can carry it and just do it whenever I want. And then I never take it anywhere. But, so from that, you transition back out of the oil and gas industry and back into, you and I again working together, this time in the tech industry, which was particularly helpful, I think, to both of us to kind of see that side of it. And then from there, we transition. I go back into the oil and gas industry, and you go back into unmanned systems. So help me understand that.
Yeah. So, obviously being in the technology and the e-learning industry was helpful for me. I've since used a lot of what I learned there with droneacademy.com, which is, obviously a tool that I developed.
Shameless plug, and that's
Shameless
fine.
plug. Hey,
I was going to get to that, but you beat me to it.
But being able to understand e-learning and how to provide that, obviously drones are an amazing tool, and making them accessible to the masses is only going to help adoption. So I did do that. Like I said,
and I think the hobbyist doesn't understand, if they're flying that thing, the risk associated with it.
Yeah. I mean, and that's an interesting thing, because the FAA, they look at it like it's an aircraft. I mean, it is an aircraft to them, whether you're flying it as a hobbyist or as a professional or for commercial use. And so you are, whether you want to be or not, you're an aviator. When you power that thing up and throw it up into the air, you're an aviator as far as the FAA is concerned.
That's why I wear a flight suit every time I fly mine.
I almost wore one today. I truly did, but I thought I don't want to do that.
I had that tan one that you gave me still. I started to wear it, but
yeah, but it is. And so, obviously the FAA, their charter is to maintain safety of the national airspace for general aviation and commercial aviation and all aviation, really. So, unmanned aircraft tend to get demonized in a lot of ways. Because there's no pilot on board to see and avoid. We can't swerve if something's coming close to us. But there have been huge strides in the last few years on onboard sensors and things that you can put on the aircraft to help you identify things that are around you, whether it be like ADS-B or something like that, so that you can safely integrate in the national airspace and operate. I mean, we operate on a regular basis in the same airspace, co-located with manned aircraft, and you can do that safely in a lot of cases now, as long as you coordinate it properly.
Yeah, and technology is catching up, right? So, like, I know when I go to launch I have a little Mavic Mini 2, and when I go to launch it, if I'm near an airport or restricted airspace, it won't let me launch it.
Yeah.
The software to run the drone just flat locks me out of it until I contact
Yep. Yeah.
The tower or whatever, or just decide, well, forget it, I'll just go find somewhere else to fly.
Yeah. And that's that's primarily a function of DJI, which obviously owns a significant portion of the market right now for hobbyist and commercial and light industrial drones. And a lot of people complain about it, but I think that it's an important part of the deal, because the alternative to that, as somebody who's spent thousands of hours in a manned aircraft, I want to come home.
Yeah,
my family wants me to come home, and I don't want.
You don't want my tiny little drone to take your big plane out of the sky.
Yeah, and there's debates about whether or not that's even possible. With
if it's even debated. I think we should probably look at it. And
Yeah.
I'm probably one that has gripe, like, oh man.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I completely understand it. So
Well, I do too. I mean, Alliance Airport is
Mm-hmm.
4.785 miles from this house,
and of course you know that
yeah. Well,
exact measurement.
but you're inside that 5 mile ring, and so if I wanted to go out in the backyard and fly, I have to get approval from
Right.
the FAA to fly in my backyard, which is kind of annoying, but it is what it is.
Yeah, we ran into that actually. We had our roof replaced this last year.
Mm-hmm.
When the adjuster came out, he's like, "Yeah, Travelers doesn't let us walk roofs anymore. He had a drone,
Yep.
and we're close enough to the airport there in Conroe. He had to get permission to fly it, but we
Yeah.
sorted it out. But so anyway, so you get back into the UAV space with Martin, and then Martin was acquired by
Shield
by
AI.
Shield AI.
Yep.
And I did some research on Martin. It was actually started by a SEAL. Is that right?
So Shield is
Shield is-
so
okay.
so Shield AI was founded by brothers Brandon and Ryan Singh. Brandon was a Navy SEAL. His brother Ryan, he started basically, if your phone wirelessly charges, it's due to Ryan's first company. He developed a technology that was eventually bought by Qualcomm.
Wow. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan. Yeah. So Brandon and Ryan, both of them incredibly gifted and talented and smart guys. So yeah, it's kind of an intimidating company to work for, just because
Right.
the pedigree of the leaders. But
But that's a great thing. And
is.
and when I was reading it, and with looking at it, it said, what I understood was that he, as a SEAL, understood the importance of proper intelligence when you're executing the operation. So help me understand kind of how Shield is bringing that intelligence to the battlefield, and what that means for the safety of those operators.
yeah, no, that's a great point. And like we were talking about earlier, since the beginning of warfare, getting the high ground was key, right? Whether it was taking a hill or putting somebody in a balloon as an observer, airplanes, satellites, we're slowly working our way up. And UAS and spy planes in general, if you can use that term, have always been critical in providing, relevant, actionable data, actionable intelligence to battlefield commanders, so that they can make smart decisions about where to go. Right? You have that perspective, and so it allows you to make decisions and see things that you otherwise wouldn't. And so smart decisions often save lives. Right? That's the idea. So when you look at what Shield provides, and kind of like the stack, if you will, of what we call it. So, we have, small aircraft in the Nova that's like a quadcopter size aircraft, and then the VBAT obviously slightly larger. And so that provides kind of a tiered intelligence capability. So you have your persistent ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance in your VBAT that can, kind of loiter in an area and provide at full motion video. It can provide other types of signals intelligence, things like synthetic aperture radars, where you can do change detection. So, for example, talk about safety cases. I spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan utilizing these tools. And so, using something like synthetic aperture radar, which is primarily used in a lot of cases for things called what's called change detection. And so you can fly over a road one day and it'll check it out. And then you fly over the next day, and the system can determine when a change has occurred. So, for example, if there's disturbed earth or something like that, that might indicate a roadside
buried,
bomb. Something that had been
yeah.
buried, yeah, something that had been placed. It will key that and trigger it. And so, there were multiple. I probably can't even count it on two hands and 2 feet the number of times that we identified these bombs that were in place because of this technology. And obviously, being able to maneuver into that place with that intelligence and disarm that, it saves lives. It keeps people from getting injured. And so,
And who knows how many lives
you
saved,
you
right?
can't even quantify
no,
that,
no.
right? And so, but I do know that it works, and that kind of intelligence provides very, very real safety cases. So that's something that the UAS industry has been doing for years now, providing that type of perspective, overwatch, and capability. Obviously, the technology with SIGINT and wide area search and synthetic aperture radar, it's getting more and more interesting, and the capabilities are growing. But what Shield has been really great about doing is two things. One is moving down into the small space. So we've transitioned from the Overwatch kind of wide area,
like large fixed wing.
Yep. So,
UAV.
Yeah, and that's great, and that certainly it's part of the layered approach. But when you look at things like the Nova aircraft, which again is a relatively small quadcopter that can, even in communications denied and GPS denied environments, can self-navigate through buildings and areas and create 3D models and maps of those buildings, and even provide information about who or what might be in there.
And so as it's navigating itself through the building, it's sending. Can it send the map?
It can, yeah. So it can. Typically, again, this is going to be employed by a frontline, soldier, Marine, special operations operator, and so they are going to be somewhere nearby. So it can either save that information to the aircraft to be collected later, but in more frequent use, it's a real-time data transfer back to the control unit, and so a nearby unit can, in the matter of a few minutes, have an accurate 3D model of the interior of a compound or a building, to be able to make very real decisions about who goes where, who does what, and just to be able to know what you're walking into.
Sure.
I mean, obviously, knowing what's in the room that you're about to walk into, it could change your entire strategy or your tactics that you use. So
it does seem handy.
Handy is a good way of putting it. So when you look at this now, we've gone from UAVs being used to create perspective and large area intelligence to now we're bringing it back down to ground level, building,
literally room by room.
That provides intelligence in real time to somebody who's literally about to engage in something that could be very uncomfortable.
Yeah, engage in a mortal fight.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when your life is on the line, or you want to make sure you have absolutely every piece of information you can have.
Yeah, I would love to be over-informed at that point.
Yeah. You want to over-communicate that. And so that's really kind of the neat thing, especially as we start looking at, obviously Russia's on the top of everybody's mind, but, you look at China, you look at other peer or near peer, nation state operators that we may have conflict with at some point in the future, and their capability to disrupt things like GPS or communications is very real, and that's something that we never experienced in the asymmetric warfare with Iraq and Afghanistan in the truest sense. So we're kind of re-energizing these muscles of understanding that, like, we have to rely on technology, because we're not going to have this obvious advantage that we had over the last 20 years of warfare. We have to be smart. And so things like ANPT, so being able to navigate in GPS or communication denied environments, that kind of AI, and AI is kind of a buzzword, but allowing machines to do things for us that we maybe couldn't do for ourselves in that situation, that is going to be key to us maintaining any kind of superiority in the battlefield, because you better believe that China is working on AI, and they're working on computer systems that with the machine learning and vision systems that can continue to operate in those types of denied environments. And if we have to keep up, and we are right now, I believe.
I would imagine we're doing more than keeping up. We're probably going to lead the world in that, and
we are. But I don't want to sit on our laurels for too long.
You can't, especially with technology as quickly as it moves. And so, give me an idea of, like, I know when you first started with Martin, they had the VBAT, and that thing's very cool. And there's some safety intrinsic in that for the people having to manipulate it, right? So it was built in a way that they could actually put their hands on it.
Yeah, and that's somewhat unique. Obviously anybody who's been in manned aviation or unmanned aviation for any period of time, that you want to stay away from the big spinny things.
Yeah, they're waiting to chop you up.
Yeah, and so those safety exclusion zones are kind of a well-known and regarded safety metric that you don't violate them, because there's no coming back if you walk into that prop arc. So that's a consideration for a lot of aircraft, especially for UAS that like ours operate in maritime environments, sometimes smallish ships, and so there's not space as a premium, and especially in the VTOL space of vertical takeoff and landing. So for a lot of our competitors and a lot of aircraft manufacturers out there, they basically take an airplane and they strap a quadcopter or a multi-rotor system to it to provide that vertical lift. But what you end up having is these exposed spinny death blades, as we like to call them.
I'm going to stencil that on my when I get home.
That provide a very real hazard. And oftentimes require you to be far away from the aircraft, which can be tricky if you need to move it or manipulate it.
Right, especially on a boat. It'd be sometimes tough to even get out of the radius of it.
Yeah, exactly. And there are some boats that are small enough that you really can't get out of the way of it. And so obviously the VBAT is designed in a way that using a ducted fan system, there's no exposed blades, so that the propeller system and the propulsion system is ducted in. So it actually, we teach our crews that you can, during takeoff and landing, hold on to it and maneuver it around if you need to a little bit, and that is kind of interesting because, again, it's not something that the regulators who make these safety rules for unmanned systems, especially when you're working with the Department of Defense, they have these metrics that they like to look at. And so it's hard to help them understand that, of like, no, this is safe. There's no exposed blades. You can get this close and it's okay. And when they finally start realizing what that means for them operationally, it's great because, you don't have to wear a full flak and Kevlar and, all that just to get near an airplane.
You can choose to.
If you want to.
Yeah. Does it provide enough lift to pick a person up?
No. Well, no. So there...
Come on, man.
Depends on the person, I guess.
I'm not, like a baby.
Yeah. No, you could definitely strap a baby to that if you wanted to. I wouldn't recommend it, but you could, just purely physically.
I'm just curious. Not that I'm going to do that. So that's very cool. So it takes off vertically.
It does.
But also, I was looking on the website, and it looks like there's options to drop it out of planes, and it pick up and fly.
There's all sorts of things. We're looking at ways to deploy the system, if you will, that are unique and useful. Whether you can and whether you should or you would need to can be different sometimes.
I just thought it was neat. I believe it was an animation, but it looked pretty cool. I was like, if that's not an animation, I'm very happy. But
I think I know which one you're talking about. I believe that is an animation. We've done some physics simulations on it, and it should be theoretically possible, but we haven't had the opportunity to go throw one out yet.
I figured that out, man. Let me know when that happens. I want to come watch.
So we do with the Nova aircraft that can be deployed from another aircraft, whether it be a fixed wing or another drone or manned aircraft. We can deploy those.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, which is pretty neat.
So essentially, then a VBAT could carry one of the Novas and then deploy it.
Yeah, or more. And that's kind of the idea long term, right? As you think about the idea of, you have this drone and you're flying around and you say, hey, I think I see something that bears a little bit more research. And then from there, you can drop an autonomous Nova system that could fly in and navigate the area and provide, feedback either as a relay through the VBAT or directly to ground units to help them make a good decision.
Could it then go redock?
In theory, yeah.
Elon can land a rocket.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Elon's a great guy. He's very, very smart.
He's got a lot going on.
Yeah. We look at the Nova as, we haven't, I don't know that we've tried to redock it yet, but, there's other things.
But you might not have to.
There's other
to your
things
point, if you could carry, more than one of those on a VBAT, then you might not have to redock. You could just deploy another one.
Yeah, and there's absolutely other terminal states that you could see with a Nova. Once it's completed its mission, there's all sorts of things you could do with it.
So, one of the other things I thought was unique about the VBAT is that all of the optics and stuff, the camera, all mounted on the nose.
Mm-hmm. Most of it, yeah.
And it rotates.
Yep.
So if it's in a vertical position, you can still rotate the camera over.
Yeah.
And one of the applications that I saw on the website, a civilian application, was specifically used inspecting offshore platforms.
Yep.
And so it was able to hover out there above the water or whatever level you needed it, and you could lay that camera over and do inspections and those types of things. So has there been any type of appetite for that? Have you guys, obviously the capability's there.
Yep.
Have you guys been able to push into that market at all?
A little bit. Again, it's interesting because we talk about the regulations being behind the technology, and that's another area, specifically with the VBAT, because of its size. It doesn't really fit into the traditional Part 107 small UAS, so it's not like a Phantom or an Inspire or a Matrice system.
How big is the VBAT?
Yeah, so we have two different configurations of it. One is about 88 pounds gross takeoff weight, and the other is 125 pounds. So not huge, but they do fall outside the current regulations.
What's the length of it?
It's about you're talking about like tall if it's standing up,
right?
8-9 feet. So I mean it's
pretty good size.
Yeah.
What the wingspan?
That depends on the airframe.
I got you.
But
roughly,
it's 6-ish, 7-ish feet.
Gotcha.
Depending on the airframe.
So we're not talking about something you go down to the hobby shop and buy. This is a big. Yeah. It's an airplane.
It is an airplane, yeah.
Yeah.
And the FAA very much treats it like an airplane. We follow all of the same, FAA requirements that like a Cessna 172 follows. So we operate under what's called Part 91, which is the FAA regulation that drives all that stuff. So we are very much engaged in the FAA safety mindset in the way we design and operate our aircraft, which is great. It's interesting. So coming from the Marine Corps, right? We always used to joke that that safety was a luxury that the Marine Corps couldn't afford. Obviously, just that kind of mindset. We joked around that safety was for the Air Force, those types of things.
Well, no, my wife's Air Force.
I know,
and my daughter wants to go to the Air Force.
No,
so.
I know. I've got Air Force in the family as well.
Bump your brakes a little bit.
Come on,
but
they know.
They know. They do.
They know. But yeah, so it's interesting though because obviously the Marine Corps, we kind of always fancy ourselves as being a little bit more rugged in the way we do things. But being in Marine aviation, on the aviation side, there is deep roots of a safety culture in all aviation, and that doesn't. That does extend into the Marine Corps aviation as well, Navy aviation. And so it was kind of a weird paradox of being, around people who, maybe didn't always think that safety was worth the time, but then being in a situation in a field where you literally had to be safe or
within the same organization.
Yeah, exactly. And so there was some duplicity there with some thought processes, and we've seen that go extend even to this day. I think it's kind of interesting because aviation is one of those things where if you don't do it the right way, you die. You can die. Yeah,
it's one of the things I had that realization sitting on an airplane. Waiting for it to take off. They had to do some maintenance on it while I was sitting on it. And someone said, "Oh, does that make you nervous?" And I said, "No, because the mechanic that fixed it got on the plane with us."
Exactly. Yeah.
And I was like, so he's going to live or die by whatever he did, so I'm good.
Yeah.
I feel like he's going to fix it for real.
Yeah, he's gonna put 100% into it at least.
You would think so, unless
hope so.
Whatever's going on in his life. But yeah, I don't know. Who knows? But
no, as good as my last flight.
But and it goes back to even pilots, right? So when trying to get people to in the oil and gas sector and other industries as well, getting people to run checklists or follow procedures and those types of things is a challenge. But one industry that I've never noticed that being a challenge in is the airline industry when pilots are looking at airplanes before they're about to fly them. And the only reason I can come up with is that they're about to get on that thing too.
Yeah, skin in the game.
For sure.
And we used to joke around about that in unmanned aviation. You don't have that same skin in the game. So, and I think that partly drives the perception that, unmanned aircraft aren't as safe as manned aircraft. Because the pilots aren't there. They don't live and die by the decisions that they make. And so, we used to joke around and sit behind our students with tasers, and if they messed up, we'd give them a tase just to, remind them that their decisions.
You joked that you would do that, or did you actually do that?
joked
Yeah,
that we
there you
would
go.
do that.
That's
We
what I
joked
thought
that
you
we would
said.
do
That's
that.
what.
Yeah.
That's what I thought you said.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
Yeah,
it was clarified.
we would not do that.
No, of course
obviously.
not.
But
Wouldn't dream of it.
but it would have been funny.
It's a good joke.
Yeah, and it might have actually been a good tactic.
It would have been effective. Maybe we just never know.
I mean, I don't know. Yeah, we'll
never know. So the right now you're trying to, obviously the bulk of what you guys do is military.
Yes.
Have you done any civilian application?
Not as much. Again, the regulation is.
I guess the
Yeah.
question more adequately covers it by saying what part of the regulation is limiting the use of it for civilian.
Yeah. So that's a good question. Obviously, beyond visual line of sight is a big one, specifically for aircraft like ours that have endurance and altitude capabilities that are beyond your standard kind of commercial off the shelf unit.
Yeah. Okay. So like, put that in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So for my Mavic Mini,
Mm-hmm.
It says the capabilities are 6 kilometers. Whatever. Of course, terrain and stuff like that will affect it, but I can certainly fly that thing out of line of sight
Easily. Yeah.
easily and still have full control of the system. And then I'm limited from a battery perspective to 30 minutes or so. Usually it's about 22 or 3 minutes. To put it in perspective, the VBAT's range is?
Well, over 100 miles. We've done testing on 4G, 5G that would have an almost unlimited, and then obviously if you look at SATCOM, that's anywhere in the world that you can do that kind of stuff. But from an endurance perspective, you're talking anywhere between 6 and 11 hours, and altitudes anywhere up to 20,000 feet or more, and then obviously range just with a normal antenna, you're talking close to 100 miles. So that's.
Can you pass it off?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
then the range is essentially infinite.
You're limited by fuel.
By
at that
fuel,
point.
correct.
Yeah,
That's what I meant.
Yeah, and so again, when you look at the FAA requirements right now, when they look at the UAS, visual line of sight is kind of a hard requirement to get around. They do offer waivers, and we have in the past. You can get approvals to do that in specific cases, but to be able to do it, all the time, anytime you want to. That requires a lot of paperwork and a lot of FAA review and things like that. So that's a really a challenging thing to do for us, for any UAS manufacturer right now. That's one of the areas where, especially larger aircraft, where the regulations are just behind the technology. Sure. But yeah,
well, the regulations weren't written for
they weren't. Yeah,
a fixed wing.
Yeah,
airplane. Basically, they weren't written for that. They were written for the.
Yeah.
The quadcopter, or the whatever's out there that you can fly around. You can go buy at the hobby shop.
Yeah, absolutely. We are in a gray area of regulation that is, we're bigger than a hobby aircraft, if you will, but we're far smaller than a C-130 or a C-17 or even a Cessna or a Piper Cub or anything like that. So
what type of fuel does it use?
So it can use pump gas. We like to use racing fuel just because it makes us feel cool, I think.
You just like saying racing fuel?
Racing fuel. Shout out to VP. They make great stuff. But so we like to use that. One of the areas that we have investigated and done some testing in is heavy fuel. So basically diesel or jet fuel. Obviously, back to from a safety perspective, operating on ships specifically, ships don't like fire. Fire can do real bad things to a boat, and so obviously diesel fuel or jet fuel is favorable in those environments just because it's slightly less flammable, and so we have done some testing on heavy fuel variants of our aircraft that rather than using high octane racing fuel can use jet fuel or diesel.
Right. Awesome. So. Those regulations, is there any movement for changing those? Because I'll tell you what from a civilian perspective, and this having worked specifically in the oil and gas industry, and the example on your website is inspecting an offshore platform. Any barrier to entry will have a default mechanism back to how we're doing it right now. So if you say, hey man, yeah, we can fly this. We've got to work through a variance with the FAA. The answer is almost inevitably going to be, we'll just keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any movement from the FAA towards like, okay, we recognize this is a little bit different thing in this application, makes sense?
Yep. Yeah. And so to the FAA's credit, they have invested a lot of time and energy in this, specifically in UAS across the board. They a while back, they released, new rules on how to provide what's called a type certificate, which is essentially, if you go fly on a 737, it received a type certificate, which means the FAA reviewed their, the engineering, the drawings of it. They said this aircraft built this way is sound. And so that way, every aircraft that comes off the line, as long as it has a production certificate, they can kind of do a quick review of it, a quick inspection, and say, yep, that's good to fly, right? So most large manned aircraft have go through that type certificate process. Well, nothing like that existed for UAS, and so there was really no way for us to get around these rules, because every single time you try to do it, it was a one-off. So the FAA has made some progress in creating, type certificate rules for UAS, so that we can go through that process and get our aircraft stamped off as safe to fly, airworthy to operate in the national airspace, and obviously that opens up a lot of space for things, applications like ours, but also you see a lot with like delivery aircraft, Part 135 for like Wing and Amazon and all those companies that are trying to deliver things with drones.
Just in my mind, I think if you look forward 100 years, and it will be the reaction to us looking up and seeing a drone in the air will be the same as it is right now for us looking up and seeing an airplane. It's just like, oh, there's an airplane.
Yeah.
It's just I can't imagine it getting less useful.
Yeah, no, the utility is going to continue to increase as the technology improves, the endurance of battery powered aircraft improve, and as the regulations catch up with the industry. And it will be nice, because obviously, I don't know if you've ever experienced it, but I've had it where I've been out flying somewhere and people have threatened me, for flying a drone.
No, I tend to not be very invasive when I fly things. I know you're a little bit more invasive, but
when you're
what are you going to do?
Yeah.
But no, I've actually not experienced that, but also I probably don't fly as much as you.
Yeah. And it's not an uncommon thing for commercial drone operators, even, operating, in the small UAS space. There you get varied responses from, hey, that's so cool. Can I see it? Can I fly it? Those types of things, to, you flew near my house. I'm sure you were trying to look into my window and look at my wife or my daughter. And a lot of that is born out of, I hate to use the word ignorance, but just,
well, it is
about the capabilities. Like, I think people watch a lot of movies and they think that drones can do things that they can't.
Right.
And so there's this perception of drones being able to look through your roof and see everything that's happening in your house. And that's just not the case yet.
Yet. I love the word yet there. Yet. You're right, though. I mean, but, and the in my experience, generally the response is, hey, man, that's cool. Or one thing's for sure, when you're flying one, it gets a lot of attention.
Usually, yeah.
When people notice, hey, there's a thing in the air that they're still new enough and unique enough that people don't see them every day, that it does get some attention. And so with that, there is an obvious need for responsibility and operating it responsibly and those types of things. And I think the average hobbyist that just goes and like literally I bought mine on Amazon and it was at my house in 2 days, and I got it and charged it and flew. Like, it was that easy. And I knew a bit more just because you and I are friends, and I've had one before and that kind of stuff. But I mean, anyone can do that.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Other than Shield, I know you've got you mentioned earlier Drone Academy, and so tell me a little bit about that and what that is looking to achieve.
Yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, that is an online kind of e-learning tool for people who are interested in drones, essentially. Primarily focused on getting people ready for Part 107 certification. So there are two ways you can fly a drone. One is under Part 107, which is kind of the default. That's if you want to do it for anything that's not just strictly hobby. If you want to create a YouTube page, if you want to take pictures of your house to put it on the market to sell it, if you want to, do whatever, you fly under Part 107, and that requires you to actually go and take a test with the FAA, and you get, an actual pilot's certificate card for small UAS. And so that's one way, and that's one of our areas of focus is helping people prepare for that exam and learn about aviation safety and how to be a safe pilot, really, and how to share the airspace responsibly. And then the other thing, there's a carve out, if you will, for recreational use. So you don't have to be a Part 107 pilot if you just want to go out to the park and fly for fun. You can do that on your own. But even now, the FAA has actually put together what's called the trust exam, and that is required for even for hobbyists to go and take. So technically, before you fly at all, you need to have taken one of those two tests. Now, the trust exams you can do online. It doesn't cost you anything, and it's super easy. But even that is just it's meant to give you a kind of a high level understanding of this is what it means to operate in these different types of airspace, and this is where you may see aircraft, and understanding basic weather and things that can impact the safety of your flight. So I mean, ultimately the end goal is to minimize damage and injury and death. So keep your drone away from other aircraft, keep your drone away from people and buildings, kind of common sense stuff that you would think, but apparently there's been enough drones run into buildings that they felt like they needed to talk about it.
I've hit a building with mine.
Yeah, I know.
So I appreciate you bringing that up.
I wasn't going to throw you under the bus, but I appreciate you bringing it.
Yeah, with each of mine, frankly.
Well,
but
it happens. It is a skill.
I try to get a little cutesy sometimes. See how close I can get to it.
Yeah, it's everybody gets to that point where they feel like they're comfortable enough that they can start getting.
Well, I've never gotten to that point, but it has not stopped me.
Yeah. I always appreciate your boldness.
Yeah, no, never. It's never stopped me. I may not know how to do it, but I'm confident.
And that's all that matters.
Well, until it's gone. But
if you can replace it, that's all that matters.
So when I bought my last drone, I reached out to you, and I said, is there one that I can buy that is small enough I don't have to register it? So that's what the Mini was built, so you don't have to register it with the FAA. Do you still have to take the test?
So anything over, like we mentioned, anything over 250 grams, you have to register. Anything under that, you don't. There is, I believe, technically still any time that you're operating, even if it's under 250, I believe you may still have to take that trust exam.
I'll tell you what's interesting is just how easily using your drone can throw you into having to be fully certified. I mean, literally, my dad reached out and he's like, hey, can you come video some stuff here at our HOA that we can put on our website for our HOA page? And even though I didn't charge him for any of that, I would have still had to been.
Yeah, in the most technical understanding of the regulations,
correct.
And obviously there's there's two parts of rules. There's what the rule says, and then what the rule actually means, or
the intent of it. Yeah.
And so I mean, technically, anything that is not strictly recreation. So how they define that is a little tricky. Now, the rule actually gets even more complicated because the FAA has interpreted it as the intent of the takeoff. So if you took off, for example, and you said, I'm just going to go to the park and fly. And so you're flying around the park for fun, and then you see there's a structure fire or a major crash or something crazy that happens on a road near the park, and you scoot on over there and you happen to capture footage of that crash, and let's say a news agency reaches out and says, hey, we'd like to buy that footage. You can technically sell that footage, and even though that's a commercial activity, your intent at the time of flight was not commercial. So again, and there's not.
You understand how that'll be used by people like me, right?
Absolutely.
Like, well, my intent was just to fly around this neighborhood, and they bought that footage from me. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. And that is, again, that is a loophole that the FAA is kind of aware of, and I think it's a kind of an honor system for stuff like that. But also, when you think about the sheer number of aircraft that are registered, drones that have been registered recreationally and commercially. It's a large number, and the FAA is not today really staffed. Like, as a manned aviator, there's something called a ramp check, right? So because they know that as a pilot, you're probably taking off from an airport, or runway.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so they can send an aviation inspector, an ASI out there, and they can say, hey, I'd like to see your paperwork. I'd like to, make sure that you're current, make sure that you have registration for the aircraft, all the basic stuff that matters. And they can do that pretty easily because you're a captive audience at that airport. With drones, that's not the case. You can take off from anywhere. You can be flying from anywhere. And, there's not roving gangs of FAA inspectors just, hanging out on the street.
You sure?
I don't know, man.
I mean, they could be plain clothes.
The
chances are they don't exist. You're right.
So, really, when you talk about it like that, it's a lot of people roll the dice on that, and they gamble and maybe do things that are outside the law because the likelihood of them getting punished is small, and that's a challenge for the industry right now because I always tell people that students that come through, the second you start flying, you're an ambassador for the entire industry. Whether you're a hobbyist or a commercial operator, people look at you and they think that all drone operators are whatever you are. Mm-hmm. And so if you're reckless and you don't pay any attention to the rules and regulations and general basic aviation safety protocols, well, that only makes the industry look bad, and it only makes regulation harder on us as an industry. So something that you see in manned aviation that we're trying to push through education and just general culture development in the unmanned systems space is that very, very deep history of safety culture, of self-policing our own. In manned aviation, if you're flying and your right seater does something stupid, you're going to call him on it because
you're in the left seat.
And that's true. Even if you just see your buddy who's being reckless, you're going to call him on it because you care about them and about the industry and about if it's a hobby for you, you care about your hobby. And so that we haven't always seen that in the unmanned space, and we're starting to get there, but it takes, again, because a lot of drone pilots don't think of themselves as aviators in the truest sense, so there's not that sense of ownership in the industry or ownership in the hobby, and so you get some resistance to that self-policing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And to your point, the vast majority of people that go and fly these things will never have anything happen.
Yep.
And they may crash their thing, but they're never going to have anything that's going to bring the force of the regulation down on them. Mm-hmm. The problem is the thing that does bring that down is that you brought an aircraft out of the sky.
Yeah.
And there's real consequence to that. And it's important for people to understand that there is a real responsibility when you're sharing airspace with, airplanes with people in them.
Yeah. Not only that, and that's obvious. I mean, I fly a lot. I don't want to die in an airplane crash. Mm-hmm. I don't know anybody who does.
No.
And so, but beyond that, even when you look at, an aircraft like a Phantom is not huge, but it's big enough that if it hits you in the head from 500 feet or 400 feet, it's not going to feel great. And so, when you look at things like just flying over people or flying over a road, people assume that these aircraft have good reliability, and frankly, they don't. Comparatively speaking to like a manned aircraft. So your drone, there's plenty of reports of like, I was flying my drone and then it just stopped working and it fell out of the sky. Mm-hmm. Whether it be, battery failure or an ESC failure that caused the motor to go out. Or
I've had a couple of times with my Mini, for whatever reason, it just lost its GPS signaling, mm-hmm. and it just starts twitching around and mm-hmm. doing weird stuff. And man, I'll just land it and go straight down to the ground with it.
Yeah, because people don't think about that. They assume that it's going to continue working. And so, you'll see things like people flying over roads. Well, I mean, as a driver, how would you respond if you're cruising along at, 50 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour on a freeway, and all of a sudden a drone falls out of the sky and hits your windshield?
Yeah.
You may swerve, you may you don't know what's going to happen, but most likely it's going to result in some sort of...
It would be unnerving,
at least,
to say the least.
Yeah, at least.
And you're right. And that's something that, I think that the average hobbyist probably doesn't think about, mm-hmm. is, okay, I'm going to take off. And if things go unplanned, what then? Mm-hmm. And we think about that somewhat when we get in a vehicle or whatever. But to your point, we just think, man, I'm going to take this thing up in the air and it's going to fly for however long the battery lets it fly, and then I'm going to put a new battery in it and keep going. And sometimes you have mechanical failures that result in a loss, and it just falls out of the sky.
Yeah, and so the thing is, obviously in manned aviation, you have pre-flight briefs that you brief, and hey, if this emergency happens, this is what we're going to do. And so, in the event that something happens, you've already worked through in your head and as a crew how you're going to respond to that. And so again, one of those things that you don't always see in unmanned aviation with drones, and people will just, like, to your point, throw it up in the air, start flying, and there's no redundancy in most of these aircraft. If you have one motor that goes out, that drone's done. It's not going to limp home on 3 just because of the way they're designed. So
I know it's going to spiral out of control to the ground.
Yes, it will. And so, without that redundancy, that safety margin of performance, it doesn't take much to create a mishap and an incident. And so you see things, like recently, I think it was the Bengals game. Somebody posted a video on YouTube and on Facebook of them basically flying into the stadium. I think it was during the postseason or something like that, but into the stadium, actually down like near the field. They almost hit one of the guide wires for one of the one of the run cameras, and then flew it over the crowd and all these things that luckily in that case nothing bad happened. The aircraft didn't fail.
And that person has some sick footage.
They do, and the FAA was very interested in it, and so they're having some very interesting conversation now, I suppose.
I would imagine.
But with that kind of what we refer to in the industry is just gross negligence.
Sure.
Luckily in that case nothing happened, but
like, you don't even have to know the regulation to know that's like, probably not allowed.
Yeah, you're like, I don't know if you can do that, but I feel like you can.
Probably can't do that. I didn't see that, but what I did see was in the Olympic ski event that I think it was a pretty good size one.
Yeah, I think it was a Matrice 600 or something like that.
Fell out of the sky behind that skier. And imagine that skier's going down the slope at 60 miles an hour or something.
Yeah.
That's fatal.
It could be.
It could be fatal.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the fact that even in the small UAS space, you can go up to 55 pounds, right? That's the cutoff. So imagine getting hit in the face with a 55-pound brick that's fallen from a couple hundred feet while you're skiing 60 miles an hour. The sheer amount of force that would generate.
It'd be horrible. And
it'd be a bad day.
I mean, you remember when Fabio got hit in the face with a goose, and that was just catastrophic. And that's a goose, man. That gives a little bit.
Yeah.
So you can imagine with a drone, but
and a notoriously soft animal.
I hate Fabio though.
I don't know why.
All of them do.
I don't know.
But anyhow, well, man, I've been looking for an excuse for a long time just to get to sit down and record our conversations, and usually they go much longer than this, but we can't for the purposes of this. But I appreciate everything. If we want to find out more information about Shield or Drone Academy, where can they go?
Yeah, so shield.ai is our website. Talks all about our different aircraft and capabilities. Or droneacademy.com is my side project for anything Part 107 or drone related.
And in fairness, I've not logged into my Drone Academy account in quite some time. And
well,
you gave me that, and it was very generous of you.
Yeah, well, we've done a lot since the last time you logged in. We launched an Android and iOS app now, so I mean, it's kind of a big deal.
I'm probably going to have to reset my password.
Let me know. I'll talk to the guys and get you set.
Man, I really appreciate your time, though, sitting down and talking with me and having me at your house to sit here. It's great. But man, thanks so much for being a part of the Mission Zero podcast, and thanks for putting stuff in the air that's keeping our operators safe on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an honor.
Awesome.
Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, bud. See you.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show and accept the mission. Please subscribe to the Mission Zero podcast on your preferred streaming service and be sure to give us a 5-star review.